The screen fades in from black, revealing the bustling streets of Sacramento. The sun is beginning its descent, casting a warm golden hue over the city. The camera pans to a sleek sedan gliding smoothly through the traffic. Inside, Eric Porter, a man in his early 40s, sits behind the wheel. His tailored suit and polished shoes suggest a man of importance, but his calm demeanor and relaxed posture tell a different story. A man simply trying to unwind after a long day at the office. The radio plays softly in the background, a soothing melody that contrasts with the chaotic energy of the city outside. Eric adjusts the air conditioning, letting out a small sigh of relief as the cool air hits his face. He's eager to get home, to shake off the stress of the day and relax. As he approaches an intersection, the traffic light turns yellow. Eric slows down, coming to a gentle stop just as the light turns red. It's a routine moment, one that happens countless times every day in cities across the world. But this time, it's different. The camera shifts to the rearview mirror, where the reflection of flashing blue and red lights suddenly appears. The sharp blare of a police siren cuts through the calm, jolting Eric out of his reverie. He glances in the mirror, his brows furrowing slightly as he pulls over to the side of the road. The camera cuts to the police cruiser pulling up behind Eric's car. The door opens, and out steps Officer Bradley Larson, a man in his mid-30s with a buzz cut and a badge gleaming on his chest. He adjusts his belt as he swaggers toward Eric's car, exuding the confidence of someone used to being in control. Eric rolls down his window, his expression calm but slightly wary. Larson leans in, his voice flat but laced with a hint of authority. Larson. License and registration. Eric complies without a word, reaching into his glove compartment for his registration and handing over his driver's license. His movements are deliberate and calm, but he can feel Larson's gaze scrutinizing him, as if searching for a reason to dig deeper. Larson. Do you know why I pulled you over? Eric more evenly. I'm not entirely sure. Larson. You didn't come to a full stop at the light. Eric frowns but nods slightly. Eric. I see. I thought I slowed down in time, but I understand. Larson doesn't respond immediately. Instead, he lingers, his eyes narrowing as he studies Eric more closely. It's clear that this isn't just a routine stop anymore, at least not for Larson. His posture shifts subtly but noticeably, as if he's already decided that this is more than a minor infraction. Larson. You're not from around here, are you? Eric hesitates for a fraction of a second before replying. Eric. I moved here a few months ago. My address is on the license. But Larson isn't really listening. His questions are starting to take on an edge, just enough to suggest that he's no longer concerned about a traffic violation. Eric's calm demeanor seems to irk him, and he leans in closer. Larson. Where were you headed in such a hurry? Eric. Steady. Just going home. The subtle shift in the air is impossible to ignore. Larson doesn't just see Eric as a driver anymore. He sees something else, something that warrants suspicion. Eric can sense the tension building, but he doesn't flinch. Little does Officer Larson know, the calm exterior isn't naivety, it's control. Larson takes a step back, folding Eric's documents with an exaggerated slowness before tucking them into his chest pocket. He straightens up, his expression shifting into something faintly smug, as though he's already made up his mind about the man sitting in front of him. Larson. Step out of the car for me. Eric's grip on the steering wheel tightens briefly, but his face betrays no reaction. Eric. Is there a specific reason for that, officer? Larson's lips twitch, but he masks it quickly. Larson. I asked you to step out of the car. You don't want to make this harder than it has to be. The threat hangs in the air, unspoken yet unmistakable. Eric exhales slowly and opens the door. As he steps out, Larson's eyes flick over him, sizing him up. Eric stands a little taller than the officer, his shoulders broad but his demeanor unthreatening. His tailored suit suggests professionalism. His polished shoes hint at someone meticulous and careful. Yet none of that seems to matter. Larson gestures toward the front of the car. Larson. Hands where I can see them. Eric complies, his movements calm and deliberate. Eric. Is there something specific you're looking for, officer? Larson smirks faintly. Larson. Just routine. We've had some incidents around here. You can never be too careful. Eric turns his head slightly, locking eyes with Larson. Eric. Incidents involving men in business suits driving sedans? Or does this have more to do with something else? The question lands like a punch, and for a moment, Larson's composure falters. He straightens up, his hand drifting toward his belt, more reflex than necessity. Larson. Watch your tone. Eric, calmly. I'm simply asking a question. There's no defiance in Eric's voice, just a quiet firmness that seems to unsettle the officer. Larson leans closer, his eyes narrowing. Larson, you seem awfully familiar with how this works. You got something to hide? Eric lets the silence stretch for a beat before answering. Eric, no, officer. I just believe in being clear about the reasons for an interaction like this. Transparency, you know. Larson scoffs but doesn't reply. He steps back, pacing a small circle in front of the car. The dynamic is shifting in ways he can't quite grasp. Eric isn't reacting the way most people would. There's no fear, no stammering, no nervous fidgeting. Instead, there's control, poise, and an unsettling calm that puts Larson on edge. Larson, muttering, "You seem pretty confident, like you think you know what's going to happen next." Eric doesn't rise to the bait. Instead, he tilts his head slightly. Eric, confidence isn't the issue here, officer. Respect is. Larson freezes for half a second before turning back to face him. The smirk is gone now, replaced by something sharper, almost defensive. He opens his mouth to reply, but the words don't come out. Eric's composure is throwing him off balance, and he doesn't like it. As the silence stretches, the tension between them feels electric. Larson is starting to realize that this isn't going to play out the way he'd expected, but instead of backing down, he doubles down. The real test is about to begin. Larson taps his fingers against the holster on his belt, his frustration barely concealed. He's not used to being challenged, especially not by someone who looks like Eric. His gaze flicks back to the sedan, as though searching for a justification he hasn't yet manufactured. Larson, turn around and place your hands on the hood. I need to check for weapons. Eric raises an eyebrow. Eric, weapons? Do I look like someone who's carrying a weapon? Larson's jaw tightens, and for a moment, his composure cracks. Larson, I'm not going to ask you again. Eric hesitates, a flicker of something unreadable passing across his face. Then, without a word, he turns and places his palms flat against the hood of his car. Larson approaches, the crunch of his boots on the asphalt breaking the uneasy silence. The officer pats Eric down in quick, rough movements, his hands lingering a little longer than necessary. It's not just a search, it's an attempt to assert dominance, to provoke a reaction. But Eric doesn't flinch, doesn't stiffen, doesn't so much as shift under the invasive scrutiny. Larson, muttering, "You're clean." He steps back, the admission sounding begrudging, like he's irritated that he hasn't found anything to justify his suspicion. Eric turns to face him, his expression calm but his eyes sharp. Eric, of course I am. Now, officer, if you're done. Larson, interrupting, I'm not done. His voice rises slightly, the words tumbling out too quickly, betraying his need to stay in control. Larson, you seem to know a lot about what I can and can't do. Care to explain why? Eric folds his arms, his posture relaxed despite the tension crackling between them. Eric, I've had my fair share of interactions with law enforcement. Let's just say I've learned a lot over the years. Larson's eyes narrow. Larson, so you a lawyer or something? Eric smiles faintly. Eric, or something. The ambiguity in his answer seems to irritate Larson further. He steps closer, invading Eric's personal space, his voice dropping to a near growl. Larson, listen, you think you're smarter than me? Think you can talk your way out of this? Eric meets his gaze evenly, unflinching. Eric, I don't think anything, officer. I just believe in fairness, and so far I'm not seeing much of it here. The words hang in the air like a challenge, and Larson takes the bait. Larson, fairness? You think fairness is what this is about? People like you always... He stops himself abruptly, the words lingering like smoke, even though they haven't fully escaped. Eric's expression doesn't change, but something about his posture shifts, a subtle but unmistakable signal that he's caught exactly what Larson has left unsaid. Eric, softly, people like me? Larson bristles, stepping back as if realizing he's just crossed a line he can't uncross. Larson, muttering, you know what I mean, though his tone lacks the conviction it had moments earlier. Eric, I think I do. And I think we both know this interaction stopped being about a traffic violation a long time ago. Larson opens his mouth to respond, but the words don't come. For the first time, he looks uncertain, like he's not entirely sure how to proceed. The balance of power is shifting, and for the first time, Larson is on shaky ground. But the moment of reckoning is still to come, and it will be one he'll never forget. Eric's voice breaks the heavy silence, steady and unyielding. Eric, officer, I think it's time you know who I am. Larson's brows knit together, his irritation resurfacing. Larson, I don't care who you are, though the faint crack in his tone suggests otherwise. Eric reaches into his pocket, his movements slow and deliberate. Eric, I'm reaching for my badge. I want you to see it. The words hang in the air, weighted with something unspoken. Larson's eyes follow Eric's hand as he pulls out a leather wallet and flips it open, revealing a gleaming badge. Eric Porter, Head of Internal Affairs, Sacramento Division. Larson freezes. His eyes dart to the badge, then back to Eric's face, searching for some sign that this is a joke. But there's no humor in Eric's expression, only quiet authority and a hint of disappointment. Larson, stammering, Internal Affairs? Eric, yes, I oversee officer conduct. My job is to ensure that the people wearing this badge uphold the integrity and values it's meant to represent. Larson's face pales, his confident demeanor unraveling in real time. He takes a small step back, his hand falling away from his belt as though the weight of his own authority has suddenly become too heavy. Eric takes a step forward, closing the gap Larson has instinctively created. Eric, do you know what the most troubling part of this interaction has been, Officer Larson? Larson doesn't answer. He looks like a man who's just realized he's walked into quicksand and has no idea how to escape. Eric, it's not the profiling, though that's bad enough. It's not the baseless escalation, either. It's the fact that you've done all of this without even realizing who you were talking to. You assumed that I wouldn't know my rights, that I wouldn't understand the laws you're sworn to uphold. And why? Because I didn't fit your idea of someone deserving respect. Larson opens his mouth, but no words come. Eric's gaze bores into him, unrelenting. Eric, and that's not just a problem for me, officer. That's a problem for everyone you encounter in this uniform. Larson's shoulders sag slightly, the full weight of Eric's words landing squarely on him. He glances down at the badge in Eric's hand again, as if it might somehow disappear if he doesn't look too closely. Eric steps back, giving Larson a moment to breathe, but his voice doesn't lose its edge. Eric, here's what's going to happen. You're going to take a step back, return my documents, and think very carefully about what you say next. Larson's lips part, but he hesitates, clearly debating whether to push back or comply. The hesitation costs him, and Eric adds, his voice lowering slightly. Eric, you're going to hear from me again. Not as a driver you stopped on the side of the road, but as the man tasked with deciding whether you're fit to wear that badge. Larson swallows hard, his face reddening as the weight of the moment sinks in. He reaches into his chest pocket and pulls out Eric's license and registration, his hands trembling slightly as he hands them over. Eric takes them without a word, tucking them into his wallet. He steps toward the driver's side door of his car, pausing with one hand on the handle. He looks over his shoulder, meeting Larson's gaze one last time. Eric, remember this, Officer Larson. The badge doesn't make you better than anyone. It makes you accountable to everyone. As Eric slides back into his car and starts the engine, Larson is left standing in the fading light, his confidence shaken and his future uncertain. But for Eric, this is far from over. His next move will ripple through the entire department. The drive home is quiet, But Eric's mind is anything but. The encounter plays over in his head, not because it's unique, but because it isn't. Larson isn't the first officer Eric has dealt with like this, and he knows he won't be the last. But this time, things will be different. This time, Eric has the authority to act. The next morning, Eric sits at his desk in the Sacramento Police Department's Internal Affairs Division. The early sunlight streams through the blinds, illuminating the file open in front of him. Officer Bradley Larson. His record isn't spotless. Minor complaints of unprofessional conduct, excessive stops, and vague misunderstandings that have never been properly addressed. Eric leans back in his chair, his fingers steepled as he thinks about the broader implications. Larson isn't an anomaly. He's a symptom of a deeper problem. And Eric isn't interested in putting a bandage on a bullet wound. A knock on his office door interrupts his thoughts. His assistant, Linda, steps in, holding a stack of reports. Linda. Morning, Mr. Porter. I've got the summary on last month's misconduct cases. Also, Chief Daniels wanted me to remind you about the department review next week. Eric nods, taking the files from her. Eric. Thanks, Linda. Can you also schedule a meeting with Chief Daniels for this afternoon? There's something I need to discuss with him. Linda hesitates, sensing the weight in Eric's tone. Linda. Of course. She slips out of the room and Eric turns his attention back to Larson's file. But his focus isn't just on the officer. This is bigger than one man and one interaction. It's about the culture that allows someone like Larson to feel justified in his behavior. And if there's one thing Eric knows, it's that culture starts at the top. Scene 7. The meeting with Chief Daniels. Later that afternoon, Eric sits across from Chief Daniels in a conference room. Daniels, a seasoned veteran with salt and pepper hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, leans back in his chair, listening intently as Eric recounts the traffic stop. Eric. I could have written it off as just another bad interaction, but that would have been a mistake. Larson's behavior isn't an isolated incident. It's a reflection of how much work we still have to do. Daniels rubs his temples, exhaling slowly. Daniels. This isn't the first time Larson's name has come up, but we've always handled it internally, quietly. Eric. And that's the problem. Quiet doesn't fix anything. Quiet lets it keep happening. It's time to be loud. Daniels looks at him, the weight of the conversation etched into his face. Daniels. What are you proposing? Eric, without hesitation. A department-wide review, not just of individual officers, but of our training, our protocols, our accountability systems. We can't keep sweeping this under the rug. If we don't hold ourselves to a higher standard, how can we expect the community to trust us? Daniels leans forward, his hands clasped on the table. Daniels, you're going to ruffle some feathers with this. Eric, simply, good. It's about time someone did. The following weeks are a whirlwind of meetings, interviews, and reports. Eric works tirelessly, compiling data, speaking with officers, and holding public forums to hear directly from the community. The Larson incident becomes a catalyst for change, a turning point that forces the department to confront its flaws head-on. Larson, for his part, faces an internal hearing. Eric makes no secret of his involvement, sitting across from Larson during the proceedings and watching as the officer squirms under the scrutiny. The hearing results in a suspension, but Eric knows the real victory isn't in punishing Larson. It's in preventing the next Larson. Months later, Eric stands at the podium of a community event, addressing a room full of officers, city officials, and local residents. He speaks not of blame, but of responsibility, of the shared duty to create a system that works for everyone. His words aren't just a call for accountability, they're a promise of change. Eric, justice isn't just about catching the bad guys. It's about making sure the people sworn to protect and serve do so with integrity, fairness, and respect for everyone they encounter. That's the badge I believe in, and that's the badge we're building here together. The applause is thunderous, but Eric doesn't linger on it. For him, this isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of a better one. As he steps down from the podium, he glances at the faces in the crowd. Some skeptical, some hopeful, but all listening. He knows change won't come overnight, but it will come. And for now, that's enough. The screen fades to black and text appears on the screen. Text, if this story resonated with you, Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Let's start the conversations that matter, the ones that lead to change. Subscribe to our channel for more stories like this, stories that challenge us, inspire us, and remind us of what we're capable of when we stand for what's right.